The dust in the Chateau de Lumière was a particular kind of ancient. It didn't just coat surfaces, it hung in the still air, a million tiny particles of forgotten time, each one a story I was desperate to hear. My own life, back in a cramped city apartment, felt a world away. Here, in the heart of the French countryside, I was breathing in the past, and for a historian like me, that was the purest oxygen. The assignment was a dream. A year to assess, catalogue, and begin the preliminary restoration of this sprawling, sleeping estate. The family line had dwindled to a distant, disinterested heir in America, who saw the place as a financial burden. To me, it was a sanctuary of silence and secrets. My first week was spent in a state of overwhelmed wonder. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. Rooms led into more rooms, each one a frozen tableau. A grand piano, its keys yellowed like old teeth, stood silent in the music room. Tapestries depicting faded hunting scenes adorned stone walls that wept with a subtle perpetual dampness. And everywhere, there were mirrors. Great, ornate gilded things, their silvering clouded and blotched with age, reflecting back a distorted, ghostly version of the present. It was in the library, however, that I felt the true heartbeat of the place. It was a cavern of knowledge, smelling of brittle paper, old leather, and that particular comforting scent of decay. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with volumes in Latin, French, and Greek. My initial task was to create a simple inventory, but my fingers itched to dig deeper. The discovery happened on a rain-swept afternoon. The sky had turned a bruised purple, and the wind howled around the stone corners of the chateau like a lament. I was examining the lower shelves, the ones tucked away in a shadowy corner, when my knuckles brushed against a panel that felt wrong. It was a subtle difference in texture, a slight give that the surrounding wood didn't have. My heart hammered a sudden, frantic rhythm against my ribs. With careful, trembling fingers, I traced the edges. There was no obvious latch, but a firm, specific push at the top right corner made the entire panel shift inward with a soft, reluctant sigh. A hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in crumbling oilcloth, was a bundle of letters. They were tied with a faded blue ribbon, so fragile it seemed to be made of cobwebs. My breath caught. This was it. The kind of find historians dream of, the personal, unvarnished voice of the past. I carried them to the large oak desk by the window, the afternoon light dying around me, and with the utmost care, I untied the ribbon. The topmost letter was dated 15 Sierra Leonean Leones Mai, 1823. The script was elegant, a flowing cursive that spoke of a refined education and a steady hand. My dearest, it began. A shiver, completely unrelated to the chill in the room, traced a path down my spine. The words were in French, and I translated them silently, the voice forming in my mind as clearly as if someone had whispered in my ear. The house feels like a gilded cage today. Mother is planning another one of her interminable soirees, and the air is thick with the scent of beeswax and hypocrisy. I am to wear the new silk dress, the color of a pale sunset, and be presented like a confectionery for the approval of some tedious gentleman from Paris. They are all the same, with their talk of hunting and politics and their eyes that look at me as if assessing a broodmare. But when I close my eyes, I am not here. I am in the orchard with you. I can feel the dappled sunlight on my skin, the coolness of the grass beneath my feet. I can taste the sharp, stolen sweetness of the first summer apple on my tongue. And I can feel your hand in mine. That is my only reality. Everything else is merely a performance I am forced to endure. They speak of my impending engagement. The words are a prison sentence. I smile, I nod, I play my part, but inside, a storm is raging. A storm that only your name can calm. Just the thought of you, of your laugh, of the way your eyes see straight into the very core of me, is the anchor that keeps me from being swept away. You have become my secret world, the beautiful, terrible truth at the center of my life. This love is the most real thing I have ever known, and yet, I must hide it as if it were a sin. Sometimes, the weight of this secrecy is a craving that claws at my heart. Until we can meet again, I am yours, completely and forever. There was no signature. Just an initial, a delicate, looping S. I sat back, the paper feeling alive in my hands. The words were over a century and a half old, yet they vibrated with a raw, immediate emotion that left me breathless. A love that dared not speak its name. A secret world. I looked around the vast, silent library, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt waiting. That night, after reading just that one letter, I saw her for the first time. I was in my bedroom, a cavernous space dominated by a heavy, carved bed and a massive armoire with a tall, tarnished mirror attached. I was brushing my hair, my mind still lost in the orchard of 1823, when a flicker of movement in the glass made me freeze. It wasn't my reflection. Standing just behind where my image should have been was a woman. She was pale, almost luminous, dressed in a gown of a style I'd only seen in portraits downstairs, a high waist, with sleeves that puffed gently at the shoulders. Her hair was a cascade of dark curls, and her eyes, large and dark, were fixed on me. There was no malice in her gaze, only a profound, bottomless sadness. And then she was gone. My heart leapt into my throat. I spun around, my brush clattering to the floor. The room was empty. I was alone. I told myself it was fatigue, an overactive imagination fueled by the poignant words I'd read. But the image was burned onto my retina. The woman from the letters. S. I was sure of it. The next day, I dove back into the bundle with a feverish intensity. Each letter was a piece of a mosaic, slowly building a picture of a life lived in the shadows. 2nd of July, 1823. We were reckless today. We met by the old stone well at the edge of the woods, the one choked with ivy. The risk was immense, but I could not stay away. For one precious hour, the world belonged only to us. You brought me a single, perfect white rose. You said its purity reminded you of my soul. I laughed, my love, though my eyes filled with tears. There is nothing pure about the thoughts I harbor for you. They are wild and desperate and consume me utterly. We held hands, our fingers laced together, and for that brief stolen moment, I was not a daughter of this house. I was simply a woman, irrevocably in love. As I read, her presence in the mirrors became more frequent, less a trick of the light and more a companionship. I would catch a glimpse of her in the reflection of a window pane as rain streaked down the glass, or in the polished surface of a silver teapot. She was never there when I looked directly, always just at the edge of my vision, a silent witness to my discovery of her life. And then one evening she spoke. I was in the library, a single lamp pushing back the encroaching darkness. I was reading a particularly anguished letter, one that spoke of a formal offer of marriage being accepted by her family. The sadness in her words was almost tangible. They have sold me for a title and a tract of land. My heart feels like a stone in my chest. When I am with him, I am a ghost. I smile, I speak, but the real me is far away with you. I am a portrait of a lady, and you, my love, are the vibrant, living woman standing just outside the frame. A soft sigh, like the rustle of silk, breathed through the room. It came from the large, clouded mirror above the fireplace. I looked up, and there she was, clearer than ever before. Her lips hadn't moved, but the voice was in my mind, clear and melodic, tinged with the faint, elegant accent of her time. He had kind eyes, the voice whispered, a sound woven from memory and longing. That was the worst of it. I could have borne a monster. But he was just a man, trapped in the same gilded cage as I. It made the charade all the more cruel. I didn't jump. I didn't scream. A strange, deep calm had settled over me. What was his name? I asked the empty air, my own voice a hushed thing. A pause, then the whisper returned, laced with a sad amusement. It does not matter. His name is dust, just as mine should be. But hers, her name was the only prayer I ever truly meant. Tell me, I pleaded, my fingers resting gently on the fragile paper. Tell me about her. And so she did. Not all at once, but in fragments, in whispers that accompanied my reading. The story unfolded in two layers, the stark, beautiful agony of the letters, and the haunting, emotional commentary from the woman who had lived it. Her name, I learned, was Seraphine. The woman she loved was Adeline, the daughter of the local physician. Theirs was a world of stolen moments and silent languages. A brush of hands in a crowded room, a held glance across the church pew, secret notes passed in the pages of a book. We had a hollow oak near the stream, Seraphine's ghostly voice murmured one night as I looked into my bedroom mirror, her form shimmering behind my own. It was our post office, our sanctuary. We would leave little trinkets for one another. A feather. A smooth stone. A pressed flower. Once, she left a locket. It was not gold or silver, but simple pewter. Inside was a tiny painting of her eye. She said it was so that a part of her would always be watching over me. I found the locket. It was tucked into the bundle of letters, the metal cool against my skin. I prized it open with a thumbnail, and there it was, a single beautifully rendered eye, a shade of warm hazel, staring out from the past with unwavering love. The letters grew more desperate as the pressure of Seraphine's engagement mounted. The wedding was set for the autumn. The chateau became a hive of activity, a direct contrast to the deepening stillness within its mistress. 10th of September 1823. The dress arrived today. Yards of ivory satin and Brussels lace. They paraded me in it before my mother and aunts. They cooed and praised, saying I looked like a vision. I felt like a corpse being prepared for its final viewing. All I could think was that your hands will never touch this fabric. Your eyes will never see me in it. This dress, which is meant to be a symbol of a new beginning, feels like my shroud. The night before the wedding, Seraphine wrote her final letter. The script was shaky, blotted in places where tears had fallen. My dearest Adeline, this is the last time my hand will form these words to you. Tomorrow, I become a wife. My body will reside in these rooms, but my soul will forever wander the orchard, the stream, the hollow oak, searching for you. They think love is a transaction, a strategic alliance. They do not know that it is a force of nature. It is the root that cracks the foundation of the house. It is the wind that howls through the cracks in the soul. Our love may have been a secret, but it was more real, more powerful, than any of their sanctioned unions. Do not forget me. In some other life, in some other time, I believe we will walk in the sunlight, hand in hand, and our love will not require the cover of darkness. I will love you until the stars themselves grow cold. Yours in this life and any other, S. I finished the letter, tears streaming freely down my face. The sadness sat heavy in my body, like weight I couldn't put down. The silence in the library was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, a coldness settled around me. The air grew thick, and the light from my lamp flickered. I looked up. Seraphine was in every reflective surface, the mirror, the glass of a framed map, the brass fittings of the desk. She was no longer a faint impression. She was there, solid and real, her eyes burning with a fierce, ancient light. They kept us apart, her voice echoed, no longer a whisper but a clear, resonant tone that filled the room. They thought they had won, but they could not conquer my heart. On my wedding night, I did not go to my husband's bed. I came here, to this library. I took the locket. I read her last letter to me, which I had hidden in the same compartment. And I made a choice. She stepped forward, or rather, her reflection did, until she seemed to be standing just beside my chair. I could feel the chill radiating from her spectral form. I did not take my own life. That would have been a surrender. Instead, I simply refused to let go. I poured every ounce of my love, my longing, my defiance into this place. I anchored my soul not to a person, but to the memory of our love. I have been waiting. Waiting for what? I breathed, mesmerized. For someone to listen. For someone to feel the echo of our story so deeply that the veil would grow thin. For you. Her gaze was upon me, and in that moment, I understood. My loneliness, my deep connection to the past, my yearning for a love that was as all-consuming as the one in these letters, it had made me a perfect conduit. I wasn't just a historian uncovering a story, I was a participant in its final chapter. What happened to Adeline? I asked. Seraphine's image softened, a tender smile touching her lips. She lived. She married a good man, a scholar from Lyon. She had children. She had a life. But she never forgot. She visited the chateau once, years later, after my husband had passed. She came under the guise of touring the estate. She found the compartment. She left her final letter to me there, and took mine with her. It was her way of setting me free, of closing our circle. I hadn't noticed it before, but tucked at the very bottom of the oilcloth was a single smaller sheet of paper, in a different, bolder hand. Adeline's letter. My beloved S., I am here. The house is silent without you. I feel your absence in every sun-dappled spot in the orchard, in the whisper of the wind through the hollow oak. They tell me you faded away, a victim of a broken heart. I know the truth. You loved too fiercely for this world to hold you. I have lived the life that was expected of me. It has been a good life, filled with its own small joys. But you, my dearest, you were the great love of my soul. You were the wild, beautiful exception. I carry you with me, always. Wait for me. In the next life, I will find you. Your Adeline. I held both letters, one from each of them, the final pieces of their story. A sense of peace, profound and heartbreaking, settled over the room. The coldness began to recede. I looked at Seraphine in the mirror. Her form was beginning to fade, becoming translucent, merging with the soft light of the dawn that was just beginning to tint the windows. The story is told, she whispered, her voice fading like a distant song. The weight is lifted. Thank you for remembering us. Thank you for letting our love finally breathe. Will you be at peace now? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Her smile was radiant, the sadness finally gone, replaced by a joy so pure it was almost painful to behold. We will both be at peace. Our love was not a tragedy. It was a victory. It outlasted empires. It defied time. Remember that. Do not be afraid to love with such a wild and fearless heart. And then she was gone. Not a flicker, not a fade, but a simple, gentle cessation. The mirror was just a mirror again, showing only my own tear-streaked face and the first rays of the morning sun painting the room in gold. I sat there for a long time, the letters clasped in my hands. The chateau was different. The silence was no longer heavy with waiting, but light, filled with a gentle acceptance. The dust motes danced in the sunbeams, not as particles of decay, but as glittering, joyful things. I had come to the Chateau de Lumière to restore a building. Instead, I had helped restore two lost souls to each other. I had given voice to a silence that had lasted for centuries. I placed the letters back into their hiding place, all except for Adeline's final one, which I kept with me. I didn't need to read more. The story was etched into me, a part of my own history now. Months later, my work at the chateau was complete. As I packed my bags to return to a world that suddenly seemed too loud and too fast, I took one last walk through the orchard. The hollow oak was still there, a giant, gnarled sentinel by the stream. I reached inside, my fingers brushing against the soft, rotten wood. And there, nestled in the hollow, was a single perfect white rose. It was fresh, glistening with morning dew, its petals soft and velvety against my skin. It was impossible, a miracle in the stark logic of autumn. But I wasn't surprised. I brought it to my nose, inhaling its sweet, intoxicating fragrance, a scent that spoke of sunlight and stolen moments and a love that was finally free. I knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they had found each other. Somewhere beyond the veil of time, in a sun-dappled orchard that knew no season, Seraphine and Adeline were walking hand in hand, their laughter echoing through eternity, their love story no longer a secret whispered in the dark, but a song sung by the very wind. And for the first time in my life, I felt not a longing for the past, but a wild, hopeful anticipation for the future, and the untold story of my own heart. The days that followed were not marked by the slow, dusty passage of time, but by the rhythm of a heart I had come to know as intimately as my own. The chateau was no longer a project, it was a confessional. Every creak of a floorboard, every shift of light through a leaded glass window, felt like a part of her story waiting to be heard. I began my work each morning not with blueprints and inventories, but with a single letter. I treated them like sacred texts, handling the fragile paper with gloves, translating the flowing script into a notebook that was rapidly filling with their tragedy. And with each word, Seraphine's presence deepened, shifting from a spectral observer to a gentle guide. One afternoon, I was in the music room, assessing the piano for restoration. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the motes of dust that danced like forgotten notes. I ran a finger over the smooth yellowed ivory, wondering if her hands had ever touched these same keys. A cold whisper breathed against my ear, making me shiver. She could play. I could not. I would sit on that very stool, and she would stand behind me, her arms encircling me, her fingers resting lightly on top of mine. She taught me a simple melody, a folk song from her mother's village. We were so close I could feel her heartbeat against my back. My mother walked in once. We froze, two guilty figures in a tableau of intimacy. Adeline simply smiled, her composure a work of art, and said, "I am merely ensuring the future mistress of the house is not entirely without culture." My mother nodded, satisfied. She never knew that the culture being taught was the language of my own liberation. I closed my eyes, and the room shifted. The scent of beeswax was overpowered by the faint, sweet perfume of lilacs. I could almost feel the weight of a heavy silk skirt, the constriction of stays, and the exhilarating warmth of another body pressed close behind me. The memory was so vivid it stole my breath. That evening, I found another batch of letters, these tucked behind a loose stone near the hearth in the grand salon. They were earlier, brighter, chronicling the first dizzying blush of their affection. 2nd of April 1822. I saw you today in the village. You were buying ink from the merchant, your brow furrowed in concentration. You did not see me watching from the carriage. I felt like a thief, stealing a moment that was not meant for me. When you laughed at something the shopkeeper said, the sound cut through the clatter of the street and found a home deep within me. I have never heard a sound so utterly genuine. It is a sound I wish to collect and keep in a locket, next to my heart. 5th of May 1822. The first note. I do not know what madness possessed me. I slipped it into the book of poetry you had ordered from Paris. My hand shook so terribly I could barely form the words. I see you. That was all. 3 words that felt like a confession of a crime. I spent the entire day in a state of exquisite agony, wondering if you would find it, if you would be horrified, if you would tell your father. When your response came, a single sheet left with the baker's boy, the world tilted back onto its axis. And you. Seraphine's voice, when it came, was young and giddy with the memory. I read those 3 words until the paper grew soft and thin. I slept with it under my pillow. It was the most dangerous and wonderful thing I had ever possessed. As the weeks turned into months, my own life began to feel like the phantom. Emails from my university, reminders of mortgage payments, messages from friends asking when I was returning, they all seemed to come from a distant, muted planet. My reality was here, within these stone walls, living a love story a century and a half old. I started to neglect my official duties. The reports to the distant air grew brief and perfunctory. My energy was devoted entirely to the hunt, to piecing together the mosaic of their lives. I found a small hidden sketchbook in a chest in the attic. It was filled with delicate pencil drawings, all of the same woman, Adeline. Studies of her hands, her profile, the curve of her smile. The artist's love was evident in every stroke. Seraphine's talent was another facet of her soul I had never guessed. One rainy night, I experienced the most profound merging yet. I was reading a letter describing a fight they had, a terrible, silent argument born of fear and frustration. 18th of August 1823. Why must you be so practical? Why must you speak of accepting our fate? This is not a fate to be accepted, it is a prison to be escaped. Your resignation feels like a betrayal more profound than any my family could ever devise. I would burn this house to the ground for you. I would walk into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on my back. And you speak of finding happiness in stolen moments? I want more than crumbs from the table of life, Adeline. I want the entire feast, or I want nothing at all. As I read the angry, heartbroken words, a wave of heat flushed through me, followed by a crushing despair. My vision swam, and for a moment, I wasn't sitting in the library. I was standing in the orchard, the air thick with the promise of a storm. Adeline stood before me, her face pale, tears tracing paths through the rain on her cheeks. You think I don't want to burn it all down? Her voice was a desperate sob, though her lips in the memory didn't move. You have a name to lose. I have nothing. My family, my father's practice, it would all be ashes. I cannot be the spark that destroys everything. The pain was acute, a searing pressure in my chest. It was Seraphine's rage and Adeline's fear, warring inside me. I gasped, dropping the letter, and the vision shattered. I was back in the library, trembling, my own cheeks wet with tears that were not entirely my own. I was no longer just an observer. I was becoming a vessel. This deepening connection began to frighten me. What was the end game? Would I simply fade into this historical echo, becoming a permanent resident of their haunted past? The line between empathy and possession was blurring. I decided I needed to find Adeline's grave. I needed a tangible endpoint, a marker of a life fully lived, to ground myself. It took days of searching in the small overgrown cemetery behind the village church, brushing aside ivy and moss from worn headstones. Finally, I found it. A simple, elegant stone. Adeline Lefebvre. Beloved wife and mother. 1798 to 1881. And beneath those sanctioned words, carved in smaller, fainter letters, as if by a hesitant hand much later, was a single added inscription, waiting for an eternal spring. I knelt there in the damp grass, my fingers tracing the words. She had lived. She had survived. She had carried this love with her for 6 decades, a secret garden tended only in the privacy of her heart. The profound resilience of it washed over me, a counterpoint to Seraphine's dramatic defiance. One had chosen to stay, the other to remain. Both acts were rooted in the same, unyielding love. When I returned to the chateau, the atmosphere had shifted once more. Seraphine was waiting for me in the grand hallway, her form clearer, more resolved than ever. "You found her," she whispered, her voice full of a quiet awe. "You saw that she lived. You see? It was not all for nothing. Our love did not destroy her. It fortified her." "It's a different kind of courage," I said aloud, my voice echoing in the vast space. "It is," she agreed. "The courage to remember. The courage to endure. I had the courage to let go. We were two sides of the same precious coin." I understood then that I had been seeing their story through a lens of tragedy. But it was also a story of immense strength. Seraphine's love was a fire, Adeline's, a deep, steady root. One was not greater than the other. That night, I experienced the memory of their reconciliation. It came not as a vision, but as a feeling, a profound, soothing warmth that started in my chest and spread through my limbs. The scent of night-blooming jasmine filled my room, though it was long past the season. There was no need for words. The feeling was one of absolute forgiveness, of a love that had acknowledged its own limits and chosen to love anyway. It was the final piece. The anger, the fear, the passion, and finally the grace. I knew what I had to do. I could not keep them here, trapped in the retelling. Their story was complete. It was time to let them go. I went to the library one last time. I gathered all the letters, the sketchbook, the locket. I did not return them to the hidden compartment. Instead, I brought them to the hearth in the grand salon where I had first felt Seraphine's youthful joy. I knelt, building a small, careful pyre of dry kindling from the basket. "This story was written in secret," I said to the empty room, my voice steady. "But it deserves to be remembered in the light." I struck a match. The flame caught, hungry and bright. One by one, I fed the pages to the fire. The paper blackened and curled, the elegant script turning to smoke that carried their words up the chimney and out into the French night. I did not see it as destruction, but as a release. I was setting their voices free, sending them out into the universe to find each other. As the last of Adeline's letter crumbled into embers, a profound silence fell. It was a different silence than before, not empty but full. A completed chord. I felt a hand, cool and weightless, rest on my shoulder. A sense of overwhelming gratitude, so powerful it brought fresh tears to my eyes, flooded through me. I didn't need to look in a mirror. I knew she was there, and I knew she was not alone. Another presence, warmer, steadier, stood with her. Then, the pressure lifted. The gratitude remained, hanging in the air like a blessing, but their presences were gone. Truly gone. The next morning, I began to write. Not a report for a disinterested heir, but a book. A testament. I wrote of a historian and a ghost, of two women who loved against the grain of their world, and of a love that proved stronger than time itself. I never saw Seraphine again. The mirrors showed only my own reflection, a woman who was no longer just a restorer of houses, but a keeper of a beautiful, fragile truth. My work at the chateau was finished. But my own story, I sensed with a thrilling, terrifying certainty, was just beginning. She had given me more than a history lesson, she had given me a blueprint for a courageous heart. And as I packed my bags to leave, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I would no longer be content to live in the shadows of my own life. The silence that settled over the Chateau de Lumière after their departure was not an emptiness, but a sanctuary. The weight of centuries of yearning had lifted, leaving the air clear and light, like the first morning after a long storm. For a few days, I simply existed within that peace, wandering the rooms that now felt friendly, their secrets finally told. I finished my official report. It was dry, factual, and utterly silent on the matter of hidden letters and whispering mirrors. That truth was not for an heir in another country, It was for me, and for the book I had already begun to write. My return to the city was a jarring transition. The noise hit me like a wave after the tender hush of the countryside. My apartment felt like a doll's house, cramped and artificial. The emails, the deadlines, the constant hum of traffic, it all seemed so trivial, so frantic. I had lived inside a love story that defied time itself. How could I now concern myself with faculty meetings and publishing quotas? I was different. The woman who had left the city was a historian, an observer of lives. The woman who returned was a participant, forever altered by a love she had been chosen to witness. I threw myself into writing the book. It poured out of me, not as an academic text, but as a narrative, a deeply personal account of my summer at the chateau. I wove together my own journey with the translated letters, with Seraphine's whispered memories, with the visceral emotional echoes I had experienced. I called it the Whispering Chateau. My colleagues noticed the change. "You seem louder," one of them said to me over coffee, a puzzled look on her face. She meant it not in volume, but in presence. The quiet, reserved academic was gone, replaced by someone with a fierce light in her eyes. I had inherited a fraction of Seraphine's defiance. The most significant test of this transformation came a month after my return. I was invited to a dinner party by an old friend. There, I met a woman. Her name was Claire, and she was a musician, a cellist with gentle hands and a laugh that reminded me of the description of Adeline's, a sound that was utterly genuine. We talked for most of the evening, and there was an easy, warm connection that felt both new and familiar. In my past life, I would have been cautious. I would have measured my words, guarded my heart, and likely found a reason to let the connection fade into a pleasant memory. But that night, I heard a ghost's voice in my mind, not as a whisper, but as a remembered conviction: do not be afraid to love with such a wild and fearless heart. When Claire asked if I'd like to have dinner again later that week, I didn't hesitate. "I'd love to," I said, and the words felt like a vow to myself. Our first proper date was at a small, quiet restaurant. Over wine, I found myself telling her about the chateau. I didn't tell her about the ghost, not yet, but I told her about the letters. I spoke of Seraphine and Adeline, of their stolen moments and their devastating courage. I felt the story welling up inside me, no longer a sad secret, but a testament I needed to share. Claire listened, her eyes never leaving mine, her expression one of captivated empathy. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, then reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was warm. "That's the most beautiful, heartbreaking thing I've ever heard," she said softly. "To be loved like that, to be remembered like that." It changed me, I admitted, the confession feeling monumental. It made me realize how much we hold back, how we build our own cages. She smiled, a slow, understanding smile. "So what are you going to do about it?" The book was published a year later. It became a quiet success, not a bestseller, but a cherished one. Readers wrote to me, not to debate historical accuracy, but to share how the story had moved them, how it had reminded them of their own loves, lost or found. Seraphine and Adeline's love, once a secret hidden in a wall, was now touching hearts around the world. Their victory was complete. Claire and I visited the chateau together the following spring. I had been hesitant, afraid that returning would shatter the perfect memory, that it would feel empty without Seraphine's presence. I was wrong. The Chateau de Lumière was different, but it was not empty. It was alive. The new owner, a foundation dedicated to preserving historical sites, had opened it to the public. There were tourists murmuring in the halls, children laughing in the orchard. The silence was gone, replaced by the vibrant hum of life. I took Claire to the library, to the hollow oak by the stream. I showed her where the hidden compartment had been, now discreetly marked with a small, tasteful plaque that read simply, in memory of a love that transcended time. As we stood there, hand in hand, the sun warm on our faces, I felt it. Not a whisper, not a chill, but a profound settled joy that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the place. It was the echo of a promise kept. They were at peace, and in their peace, they had given me the courage to find my own. I looked at Claire, at the way the sunlight caught the gold in her hair, and I knew that Seraphine's story was not an ending. It was a prologue. My life was no longer about preserving the past, but about living a present as brave and as full of love as the one I had been chosen to remember. Their eternal spring had, against all odds, bloomed for me too.